The next part of the Naked Bible is entitled The Great Reset of Truth. Which is the conspiracy theorists? The one who sees secret plots everywhere, or the one who actually is hatching them? What should we say then about the great Machiavelli, who recommends that the quote-unquote prince know how to be a lion but also a fox, capable of complicated machinations and concealing his real intentions if necessary and outsmarting his opponents? Nowadays, especially in the vast ocean that is the web, there is no shortage of people who tend to see all great events of history as always originating from obscure conspiracies. This is why it is easy for those in control of the official narrative to dismiss as a conspiracy theorist. Even those who are seriously investigating murky matters, ones that are certainly not incontrovertibly explained by the official version provided. We might mention sensational cases that are still quite recent, like 9/11 or the vial of anthrax that was waved at by the United Nations by Colin Powell to evoke Saddam's famous weapons of mass destruction. But do professional historians recognize the existence of conspiracies? Of course they do, and they do so based on precise documents long protected by confidentiality and later declassified. Just to say the second half of the 20th century, the declassification of the famous incident of the Gulf of Tonkin, the supposed casus belli of the Vietnam War, is relatively recent. Decades later, the American superpower itself admitted that no North Vietnamese vessel had ever fired on USS Maddox, whose commander in 1964 had claimed to be the victim of an attack. Just a year earlier, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy had been killed right under the nose of the planet's most sophisticated security and intelligence apparatus. For decades, the official version offered only one hypothesis: the sole action of an unbalanced killer, Lee Harvey Oswald. Over the years, tons of books and famous films have explored possible alternative truths on the case. Are those conspiracies? Only in 2007, while on his deathbed, did Howard Hunt, the number 2 of the CIA in 1963, clear his conscience. He made his confession to his son on tape. Kennedy, Hunt revealed, had been killed on the order of what is now often referred to as the Deep State. Working together, both the FBI and CIA had availed themselves of the Chicago mob killer. One of them, James Files, admitted to having fired the fatal blow. A rather unexpected person recently spoke in his own way, and somewhat sensationally about the Kennedy assassination. Bob Dylan, the music legend and winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2016, dedicated an epic and monumental piece to the Dallas assassination. Murder most foul, in an encrypted yet easily decipherable way, brings the true architects of the plot into focus. An interesting detail: the timing of the release of the song was surprising. Offered worldwide for free on the web during the days of the global explosion of the pandemic, Kennedy, and the coronavirus. Take cover, wrote Dylan on his website in presenting his new songs, as if to suggest a disconcerting correlation between the possible directors of the health emergency and their heirs of the dark forces who decided to assassinate the president of the new frontier in 1963. He was clearly a frightening man, considering his intention of changing the planet from top to bottom, challenging fundamental political, economic, and financial assumptions. His supreme objective: promote human rights around the world. In a world, justice, and the end of an endless stream of abuses. Historians rightly keep themselves at a distance from any risk of canonization by pointing out the shadowy side of the Kennedy administration, from the Bay of Pigs incident, the failed invasion of Cuba intended to overthrow Fidel Castro, to the Pan American Conference of Punta del Este, which seemed like a concession to the traditional imperialist, the traditional imperialist Yankee colonialism by American multinational corporations exploiting their South American backyard. Were these inevitable attempts at rebalancing power to then truly work to effect a positive paradigm shift for humanity, as a secret correspondence with Nikita Khrushchev would later confirm, including the mirage of ending the arms race and the nuclear nightmare of the Cold War with the USSR? Many voices are emerging about the historical juncture with the explicit intention of presenting apparently decisive writings concerning a political hidden history. One of the most famous of these voices is that of Scotland's Graham Hancock, well known to the international public for his celebrated bestsellers, starting with the Egyptian pyramids, their true dating, and the real function of these monuments. Must we now completely rewrite history? Baglino recently quoted Italian writer Paolo Rumor, a lawyer from Vicenza and a member of the important family with strong ties to the Catholic world. His book, The Other Europe, released in 2010, features the private memories of his father, Giacomo, himself the cousin of the famous Mariano Rumor, several-time Prime Minister of Italy. What does Paolo Rumor talk about in this book? He talks about yet another shameful behind-the-scenes scenario, a certain power structure that has been secretly orchestrating the destinies of the entire world, manipulating historical events through the surreptitious overseeing of dynasties, kingdoms, and empires, including modern nations, and the creation of the current European Union. It goes without saying that this structure is in firm control of the media and the flow of information, thereby controlling the official narrative of history. Paolo Rumor tells us that his father was commissioned to represent none other than the Vatican in the complex treaty negotiations for the resurrection of the post-war Europe negotiations that were initiated while the Second World War was still underway. Giacomo Rumor, his son, tells us, answered directly to Giovanni Battista Montini. At the time, the future Pope Paul VI was associated with the highly efficient Vatican Secret Service, a body that, to this day, many likely do not even know exists. So this Secret Service, together with similar European and American entities, would already have been planning the formation of the EU during the terrible years of battle of Stalingrad and the D-Day landings. Another conspiracy? Marbolino addresses the issue extensively and directly in his video La Radici del Progetto, The Roots of the Project, published on November 20th, 2020 on his YouTube channel. It is especially in a situation like one we are experiencing now that I believe that knowing the past really helps us understand the present and perhaps even allows us to hypothesize possible future developments. The author does not hide the risks intrinsic to such an enterprise. I know very well that talking about certain issues can lead to being categorized as a so-called conspiracy theorist. But didn't a conspiracy theorist used to be the one who hatched a conspiracy? Today, as we know, things are different. Conspiracy theorist has come to indicate those who discern plots, those who reveal plots, or, in a derogatory way, those who see plots everywhere. This is not the case, the scholar emphasizes. Just think of Rudolf Steiner. Already at the beginning of the 20th century, he was talking about hidden elites who, in covert way, tried to set up and manage plans to control humanity. Apparently, though, the new apocalyptic atmosphere of the worldwide, the C-word season is changing day by day. The type of information that is conveyed to the masses, eventually including the unthinkable. There are other people whom I can't imagine being included in the category of conspiracy theorists, people who have, however, made statements that seem typical of conspiracy theorists. One name above all, Monsignor Carlo Maria Vigano, the Catholic Archbishop and former apostolic nuncio to the United States, in his open letters addressed to the President Donald Trump in the run-up to the 2020 presidential elections, he explicitly used the term Great Reset. Careful, though, that expression is not typically of conspiracists. It has been used by important institutions such as the United Nations and the World Economic Forum from Davos. And Vigano is not alone. Also speaking in those terms is another leading exponent of the Catholic world, Livio Fanzago, presbyter of the Sculpi Fathers and much-loved director of Radio Maria, the official radio channel of the Roman Catholic Church. This radio channel, Biglino points out, has a worldwide network managed by 20,000 volunteers and followed by 30 million people, broadcasting in over 70 countries and 50 languages. Echoing Monsignor, Biglino recalls, Livio Fanzaga has spoken of a health coup d'etat and a mass media coup d'etat. That the accusation is direct. A shadow power has at the very least exploited the C-word emergency in the most cynical of ways, making it the ideal pretext for inflicting humanity with a quote-unquote new paradigm, a neo-slavery based on fear and totalitarianism imposed on us by a sort of psycho-health regime. Is it really that strange then that now, of all times, the Kennedy name is resurfacing? Is it in fact none other than Robert Kennedy Jr., the son of Bobby Kennedy, who is talking plainly about a conspiracy in the summer of 2020? The nephew of the president assassinated in Dallas wanted to reiterate these accusations during his speech he gave in Berlin, recalling the historic Berlin speech made by his uncle. While the Kennedy dynasty has always been associated with politics, the explicit foray onto plainly political ground by ranking figures of the religious world like Vigano and Fanzaga appear much more unusual. What did Monsignor Vigano actually say in his letter? Incendiary words for the purpose of making unequivocal accusations. We are in times when the fate of the world is threatened by a global conspiracy. A global plan called the Great Reset is underway. According to a high prelate, this is a plan created by an elite who want to subjugate the whole of humanity, imposing coercive measures to limit the freedoms of individuals and peoples. For this elite, again, according to Vigano, the crisis serves to render recourse to a Great Reset irreversible, giving the coup de grace to a world whose existence and all memory of it they wish to completely erase. Vigano also speaks of the suicide of the Western culture. He says, while citizens are denied their fundamental rights, all of this is happening in the name of a healthy emergency that is increasingly proven to be instrumental to the establishment of an inhumane and faceless tyranny. Carlo Maria Vigano is perfectly aware of the extent of his accusations and of the risks run by those who formulate them. On the other hand, he adds the naked truth is now there for everyone to see. Until a few months ago, it was easy to demean as conspiracy theorists all those who denounced this terrible plan, the plans which we now see unfolding before our very eyes, executed down to the smallest detail. In another statement, one filmed on video, Vigano adds that this plan is managed by a secret elite and it has very ancient roots. Mauro Biglino also points out that even prejudiced journalists like Aldo Marie Valli, former Vatican historian for the RAI, which is Italy's state-owned television, wrote in his blog about the same concepts expressed by Vigano, emphasizing the origins of this phenomenon, which according to him are centuries old. One of the final goals, the absolute control of information, of the narrative of events. The management of history is fundamental for those who want to govern us. Biglino stresses, recalling what George Orwell wrote wrote as early as 1948 in his famous novel 1984, a book that has taken on a new dramatic relevance. He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past, wrote Orwell, putting these words in the mouth of the official and nightmarish propaganda that dominates a fictional world, one that is now frighteningly dystopian. Prophecies, statements of facts, those who have power manage the knowledge that we believe we have about our past. Biglino summarizes lingering over a decisive element. For Orwell, the manipulation of the past also has purpose of safeguarding the infallibility of power, which in his novel is embodied by the single-party Big Brother. Infallibility? Absolutely. In so doing, they isolate anyone who dares to doubt what is being told about the past, as if he or she were committing a crime of treason, as if to say, this is what the past is. Beware any who dare to question it. The same thing is true for the ancient texts, and it is true for the construction of religions, which are based on certain dogmatic interpretations of the writings from which they are derived, an interpretation from which one must not deviate. Do you think this is a modern approach to matter? Not at all. The seeds of a certain conception of humanity are already very present in the Bible. In truth, Biglino continues, this control over information concerning the past has been established for millennia, because those who manage power know all too well that the management of knowledge relating to even the most remote facts is fundamental. This is confirmed by someone who lived almost 2,000 years ago. Bishop Eusebius of Caesarea, one of the fathers of the church. In this Preparito Evangelica, says Biglino, Eusebio writes things that help us understand the conditions our culture has lived in for centuries and perhaps even for millennia. Simple observations, in fact. The situation we are analyzing here today and present actually has very ancient roots and motivations. Eusebius quotes the writings of the Greek philosopher of Byblos, who lived between the 1st and 2nd century CE. Philo had himself studied the text of Sanchuniatin, a Phoenician priest of the 12th century BCE. We are therefore talking about some 3,200 years ago. And what did this Sanchuniatin write about? What does he claim to have discovered in his writings? The blatant manipulation of historical reality, the disappearance of facts, and the replacement of more convenient truths. The Phoenicians studied the writing of Tayut, knowing that all of the men who lived under the sun, he was the first one to have invented writing, and to have thus written books which laid the foundation of the Logos. I think when he was referring to Tayut, the T-A-A-U-T, I think he's referring to Thoth or Hermes, I think. Oh, yeah, it says that down here. Sorry. Getting ahead of myself. And who was he? This Tayut? He was called Thoth or Thoth by the Egyptians, Thoth by the inhabitants of Alexandria, Hermes by the Greeks. Eusebius adds, as far as the Jews are concerned, the most reliable facts are narrated by Sanchuniatin of Berytus, near present-day Beirut, and the Lebanese Sanchuniatin had in his hands the memories written by Jerambalus, priest of the god Yewo, who for Biglino is none other than Yahweh, the so-called biblical God. And here is the point of the matter. Sanchuniatin accuses later writers who falsely and arbitrarily interpreted in all allegorical ways and based on physical explanations and theories distorted the myths and legends concerning the gods. The Hellenic historian Philo quoted by Bishop Eusebius, thus uses the narrative of the Phoenician priest to discredit the use of allegory. The message: don't trust any interpretations that invoke figurative language. Anyone dealing with biblical themes, says Biglino, knows very well how much allegories and metaphors are used to interpret the Bible and make it say things that the Bible does not say. Mauro Biglino has been saying this for over 10 years. If we read the Old Testament in a literal way, we discover things that allegory and metaphor have kept hidden from us for centuries. Apparently, this was a technique used even back then and confirmed to us by someone as unlikely as a father of a church, Eusebius of Caesarea, an explicitly formulated denunciation. The most recent writers who have dealt with sacred history have repudiated the facts that occurred in the beginning, writes Eusebius, quoting Sanchuniatin via Philo, and after having invented allegories and myths, which they combined in such a way as to connect them back to cosmic phenomenon, they have instituted mysteries enveloped in such a dense darkness that it was not possible to easily see what had really happened. And this is still being done today, Biglino remarks. It happens every time it is claimed that, in reality, the ancients symbolically interpreted cosmic phenomena. Here, however, we are one step further. The invention of allegories and myths and the institution of mysteries, which in practice, according to the Phoenicians, was a smokescreen specially designed to hide the truth. Philo himself, Eusebius adds, told the story of how Sanchuniatin discovered the great imposture. Having come across certain secret books which had been hitherto been hidden in the depths of the temple of Amun, he devoted himself to their study and understanding of those things that were not meant for everyone to know. Oh, isn't that interesting? For Biglino, this is overwhelming proof. Knowledge of the past must necessarily be reserved for the very few. The masses must give an interpretation that is useful to power. It is also worth underscoring the chronology of these literary revelations. Eusebius wrote between the 3rd and 4th century CE, and Philo of Byblos between the 1st and 2nd centuries, while Sanchuniatin is from the 12th century BCE. Eventually, Sanchuniatin got rid of the myths and the allegories in which these primitive times and stories had been enveloped. And the priests who lived after him wanted to hide the truth once again and return to myth. Thus were the mysteries originated. Those priests, Biglino stresses, to avoid any misunderstanding, were not like those today. They did not have to lead souls toward God. They were the caste that looked after the material interest of the so-called gods. In the works cited by Eusebius, Philo provides yet another speculative declination on the cultural level of the colossal manipulation spoken by the Sanchuniatin. The Greeks, he writes, first appropriated most of the myths created by the ancient priestly caste. Then, after having adorned them in various ways, they transformed them into tragedies, and thinking of seducing men through the charm of fables, they embellished them in every possible way. These new accusations end up sweeping away the very foundations of the great Hellenic literary tradition. Drawing inspiration from these stories, writes the historian of Byblos, Hesiod, and the other Greek poets composed their theogonies, Gigantomachys, Titanomachys, and various other tales. Disconcerting? Absolutely. Our ears, accustomed to these stories since childhood, these stories since childhood and pummeled by these fantasies for so many centuries, guard the fabulous material transmitted to us by these fables as though it were an archive. So, fairy tales passed off as authentic, these stories to hide the truth. This is a real shame, Biglino observes, since the facts narrated in the original story are more convincing. They are even more fascinating than the allegories in which we tried to cloud them. This is not a conspiracy, but rather a technique widely used to manage the past, control the present, and plan for the future. The technique which Eusebius gives an account of, by once again quoting Philo, strengthened by time, those fairy tale inventions have become a heritage that is very difficult to get rid of, so much so that the truth seems like a fantasy. While the counterfeit stories seem to have all the characteristics of the truth, it is not the perfect description of what we are experiencing today. Or is this not the perfect description of what we are experiencing today? Biglino wonders. And that is the end of that section. Well, damn, he nailed it. I mean, Biglino is smart. Like, this is the same stuff I've been trying to tell people on my channels for like years and years and years, that all these ancient texts have been so manipulated and used as a control mechanism. All right, we'll continue the next video, or we'll continue the next section in another video upload. The next section is called Controlling the Past to Mortgage the Future, and we'll have that in the next upload.